Back in Black is an iconic album. It's not just a great album. It's an album that actually transcended its genre, it's transcended its time. I've always had a theory that in terms of marketing, in terms of talent, in terms of production, in terms of timing, you can take an album to a certain level of success, maybe 3, 4, 5 million sales worldwide. Once you get beyond that, it goes from being a great album into the level of a social phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon. Back in Black is that. It's one of the biggest selling albums of any genre of all time. It transcends everything. It's a remarkable achievement. You're talking about a piece of music that represents a historic moment in time for a band, but crosses into history absolutely. It's the moment when, to paraphrase something from a movie, AC/DC stepped out of history and into legend. And that is a legendary album. And if there's one album AC/DC are to be defined by, strangely it wouldn't be a Bon Scott era album, it would be Back in Black. Because that album has become more than a record. It's become part of our social phenomenon. That's the measure of AC/DC's achievement on that record. They didn't make an album for rock fans, they made an album for music fans.
Well, Back in Black is now is by far the biggest selling hard rock album in history.
Back in Black had now sold like apparently 20 million copies in America alone. It's a classic album. It endures because I think it appeals to each successive generation of kind of knuckle-headed heavy metal fans, and I count myself as one of those, because there's no discrimination against it. An 18-year-old can come out and still get something out of that album now, listening now to somebody listening to it as an 18-year-old when it came out. The songs are fantastic. There's a lot of fun there. There's pure entertainment, pure escapism, and I think that's why it's endured.
Sometimes for bands, everything comes together at a certain time, and it's almost like the karma is right. Do you know what I mean? Everything was perfect about that record, and quite often, you know, bands will, I mean, hey, most bands are lucky to make one record a tenth as good as that album in their whole lifetime. But I think everything that was good about AC/DC in terms of music and attitude was distilled into that album.
There's a very memorable review by Nick Kent from the NME about Thin Lizzy's Live and Dangerous, in which he calls the album an album made by heroes. But I think if ever an album was made by heroes, it's Back in Black. Coming back after the death of Bon to come out with an album that was the biggest selling album of their career, it was a phenomenal performance from AC/DC, and talk about backs to the wall triumph. I mean, that is the ultimate one. There's never been a story like that. One of the greatest albums ever made by anyone. When people go on about what's the greatest album ever made, people always go, it's the Beatles, the Stones, and of course, they're up there, of course they are. And then modern fans tend to sort of go for things like Radiohead, etc. But I'd say Back in Black, come on. I mean, music's about having fun, and surely that's the best.
I don't care if you're Black Sabbath, you're Led Zeppelin, you're Metallica, the Beach Boys, whoever. When you follow a masterpiece, how do you do it? Well, the answer is you don't follow. For Those About to Rock came out just over a year after Back in Black. And it immediately faced a problem. Everyone put it up against Back in Black. And when you compare the two, sadly, For Those About to Rock pales. But take it on its own. Take it away from Back in Black. And what have you got? You've got a very good album.
Few bands will release an album as good as Back in Black. Those that do very rarely replicate the success. They were never going to achieve again what they achieved with Back in Black. You know, and For Those About to Rock is the result. It's a very, very good record, but it's just not as good as Back in Black.
What For Those About to Rock did was move them slightly away from the dirtier blues rock of the Bon Scott era. It's Mutt Lange's most polished production with AC/DC. I have a feeling that's why they decided not to work with him again after that, because they didn't like the way he sterilized certain aspects of their performance and cleaned up certain parts of their sound.
Songwriting wise, For Those About to Rock just wasn't as strong. I mean, there's some dogs on that record.
I never thought it was anywhere near as good as Back in Black, and I remember being quite disappointed by it at the time. It felt to me like the songs weren't quite there. But then again, you know, it did give them the title track, which of course became a big kind of set piece in the live show. For those about to rock, brackets, we salute you, close brackets, became the sort of the closing number in the set. Because of course on the album it has, when Brian Johnson sings about a 21 gun salute, you get the sound of cannons firing. And of course it didn't take a lot to work out where to go with that, get some cannons on stage. And the cannons became more high tech as the 80s went along. Donington 81, looking back, cannons were a little bit low, a little bit cheap cannons, you know, a bit sort of pound stretcher versions of cannons. But at the time it was a big noise, explosions, lights, you like that kind of thing. So it worked.
You can imagine Mutt Lange and the band in the studio kind of going, we're going to make this the mother of all rock anthems. I mean, it's a brilliantly hilarious tongue-in-cheek title. It's fantastic, a bit of the old Roman gladiatorial stuff. And to be fair, I mean, it's a phenomenal sounding track. But once you put those cannon sounds on the track itself, it's an absolute no-brainer to go, well, we're going to have the biggest. That has closed AC/DC gigs for more than 20-25 years. It's become now a bittersweet moment for any AC/DC fan, because you know that, yes, it's fantastic, they're playing for those about to rock, but you know, it's like tear in the eye, that's the last track.
By the time that For Those About to Rock here, AC/DC were playing the biggest venues in the world, arenas, stadia, you name it, they were playing it. They headlined Donington in 1981 before 70, 80,000 people. That was the norm for them. They were so big and such a great live draw that they were playing to tens of thousands of people a night. The days of playing theatres were long gone unless they decided to do it as a warm-up. 2,000 to 3,000 people a night, chicken feed now to DC. And they upgraded their stage show accordingly. So you had the big Hell's Bell, you had the Cannons for Those About to Rock. Stage performance became an important part of what DC were. And I think DC had actually become a different type of live beast, but they were still very effective. That's where they really caught fire on stage.
For Those About to Rock was them getting too much into a big stadium heavy metal band, and it's probably the result of going on tour with Back in Black for so long, playing these enormous American arenas and thinking, well, we're going to fill those places with an absolutely enormous sounding record, but I think they left a bit of the heart and soul out of the music while they were doing that.